There is something wrong. Shouldn't you already know? Should've spelled it out. Let me put it in a song. Every time you make that face like crawling toward damaged space, out of sync and out of tune, a frequency I can't undo. Please listen close.
Hello, and welcome to FFS. As you can probably tell, unlike the intro says, I am not Paulina, as she's off this week performing in a play. I'm Mia Flores, and I'm filling in for her this week. Don't worry, this will be the same show you know and are completely indifferent about, because the same incompetent writers are still here. Tonight we're going to talk about private prisons in America, why they exist, what problems do they pose, and what can be done. But first, to understand why they exist, we have to look at the entire problem America is facing with prisons and prison population. Currently, 0.7% of Americans are incarcerated in either federal or state prisons. Now, that seems like an insanely small number. Really? That is less than 1%. Well, you're wrong. That equals roughly 1.7 million people. To compare, this graph shows the countries with the most people in prison. Yup, that's America right there at the fucking top. The next closest is China, a country with 1.1 billion more people than America, and notorious for throwing political dissidents in jail. Yeah, China has less people in jail than us. And with 5% of the world's population, America has a quarter of the world's inmates. But these numbers get even worse, because if you've been watching the show, of course they do. 5% of Americans will serve time in prison at one point in their lives. That is 1 in 20. Let me repeat that. 1 in 20 Americans will at some point in their lives serve time in jail. That is just fucking crazy. Seriously, holy shit. Now, there are many reasons why that is, and you can be absolutely sure that we'll visit that in a future video, but that goes a little beyond the scope of tonight's episode. So for tonight, and tonight only, we're just going to accept these horrifying numbers as a fact of life. So, with 1.7 million inmates, we as a country spend over $80 billion a year on our prison system. That is a number that is absolutely choking our state coffers dry, and many jails are overcrowded. Compounding this issue, many prisons in America are literally falling apart.
A new Justice Department Inspector General report saying all 123 Federal Bureau of Prison facilities require maintenance, with some in dire need of upgrades.
We're seeing crumbling prisons. We're seeing buildings that we go into that have actually holes in the ceilings in multiple places, leading to damages to kitchens, to doctors' offices, to gymnasiums, and they're not being fixed.
Yeah, that is less than great. So what is the solution to this? More counseling and programs in prison to reduce recidivism and reduce the overall inmate population? Fuck no! That costs money up front before we see any return, and we can't have that. We handle this like red-blooded Americans. Hand prisoners off to a private company to house them instead. Currently, there are 27 states that have privately run prisons. At first glance, this can be an appealing option. States don't have the funds to build more prisons to handle a growing inmate population, and private companies tend to do the job cheaper. Why not let them help out and take some of the burden off of the states? This has to be a good thing, right? Well, surprise! You're wrong again. But to understand why private prisons are a problem, let's look at the history of private prisons. You might think that private prisons are a relatively new thing, appearing in the last 20 or so years. But that's wrong. The first private prison in America opened its doors in 1844 in Louisiana, forcing its prisoners to make cheap clothing for slaves. From this first prison, we can start to see the issues with private prisons, with one former inmate saying that as soon as the prison was privatized, his jailers, quote, laid aside all objects of reformation and reinstated the most cruel tyranny to eke out the dollar and cents of human misery. And that sums up the problem with private prisons. A private company is not concerned about the well-being of its prisoners, but with making a dollar. So if they have to cut corners in the treatment of prisoners, then so fucking be it. Watch this excerpt from a report on a Louisiana prison. Warning, viewer discretion is absolutely advised.
There was a man in a cell that also doubled as a shower who was completely naked, pacing. He was just in immense pain. It's a very kind of dark building. People are held in 8 by 8 foot cells, and it's very loud. People constantly banging, constantly shouting. There are a couple cells in Cyprus that are reserved for suicide watch. They're kept alone in these cells, naked, with nothing but a tear-proof garment. Prisoners on suicide watch have different meals than the rest of the inmates. They call them suicide bags. A bologna sandwich, some carrot sticks, some apple sticks. These inmates on suicide watch are constantly struggling over trying to get more food.
Suicide watch, you're pretty much there by yourself.
Mental health staff doesn't actually arrive for about 6 hours after several people call them.
One of the main reasons why we can't keep anybody here is because you're paying piss. Ask your damn bean counters why nobody wants to stay. Between the danger level, the bullshit we got to put up with from the ivory tower, and the lack of a living wage, nobody's going to put up with this shit forever.
Spoke for a while with an inmate who had no legs and no fingers. He had legs and fingers a year ago, but he lost them when he got gangrene in the prison.
Gangrene. Mr. Scott complained about that for months to the medical staff at Wynn. They gave him the equivalent of a couple of Motrin and told him to go away.
Never saw a doctor. Whole time.
He's now suing the prison.
Holy fucking shit. That is horrifying. I am completely speechless. And that is all done in service to the almighty dollar. I really do suggest you watch the full 4-part series, and we've provided a link down below. It will definitely shock you. Now, compounding the problem is that many states have contracts with these private prisons, guaranteeing a set occupancy level, incentivizing that states sentence criminals to longer stays in jail. And as this report shows, these prisons actually lobby the state legislators for harsher prison sentences for minor crimes to help boost their numbers. Because of these institutions, many states are seriously adopting harsher laws to keep them full. That is perverse on so many levels. Now, of course that's not all, because why would it be, right? Recidivism is a bonus to these prisons. Every prisoner that walks out of a prison and does not return is not the goal of these companies, but lost profit. This means that these prisons have no incentive to actually rehabilitate the prisoners under their care. Private prisons tend to have higher recidivism rates than public prisons. But sometimes even that isn't enough to please the corporate overlords running these prisons.
2 Pennsylvania county judges walked solemnly today into U.S. District Court in Scranton. These judges found themselves on the other side of the bench, pleading guilty to a brazen and profitable scheme. Mark Chivarella and Michael Conahan faced fraud and tax charges for allegedly taking $2.6 million in kickbacks for sentencing thousands of juveniles to detention facilities run by 2 privately owned companies. Here's how prosecutors say it worked. Young offenders, often with no prior record, were brought before these judges for charges as minor as stealing change from cars or writing prank notes. The judges shipped them off to private detention facilities, which got county money to house them. In exchange, the judges allegedly received money for each offender. They also received payoffs for the initial construction and operation of these juvenile jails.
It's just really scary there.
15-year-old Bernadine Wallace was sentenced to a month in lockup for a threatening note she posted on her MySpace page.
After a while, I was just thinking to myself, I don't deserve this. I don't think that I did that much wrong. I mean, I'm not a criminal.
Civil rights attorneys say thousands may have had their rights violated.
Frequently, there were no lawyers. Frequently, you were told before you were found guilty what the sentence was going to be by the juvenile probation department, and you were whisked away.
You saw the judges come out of court today. What are you feeling?
Angry.
Why?
How do they get to walk out with all these charges? When she went in front of them, she got taken out in shackles.
Kids for Cash. That seems like a cute little charity or something. And that's the problem. We give horrible kickback schemes like these cute little names to help us feel better that bullshit like this is happening. We need to call it like it is. Selling kids into fucking bondage. For cash. Private prisons are helping turn our country into a police state hellscape, where punishment of crime and human suffering equals corporate profits. We need to finally put a stop to this. And there's not all bad news on this front. the federal government has ceased all its contracts with private prisons in 2021, citing the inhumane conditions in these prisons. And more states are doing the same, with Washington state being the last to do so in 2021, and every year the number of inmates in these private prisons trends downwards, from a high of 115,000 prisoners in 2019 to 97,000 in 2023, and that number continues to fall. But that downward trend is just not big enough, and even one prisoner in a for-profit institution is a serious problem, and we as a country really need to be better, because as Nelson Mandela once said, no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones. And by that metric, we are fucking failing as a country. With that, I'm Mia Flores. Make sure to tune in next week when we talk about Citizens United. Thank you, and good night.